Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into this absolutely fascinating paper by Kenji Noda and his colleagues. It's called From Understanding to Resonance, a case study of quantum music and embodied science communication. And let me tell you, it introduces a radically new way for us to connect with science. Instead of just cramming facts into our brains, we're looking at how we actually experience knowledge.
Okay, let's dive into this. How on earth do you explain something so incredibly abstract that, well, traditional words just completely fail? We are talking about fields like quantum mechanics. It's a monumental challenge, right? For educators and scientists trying to share these mind-bending discoveries with the public, it can be incredibly intimidating. I mean, when you're dealing with wild concepts like superposition or quantum entanglement, everyday metaphors just break down, and standard textbook explanations, they just don't cut it.
So, that brings us to Section 1, the quantum communication barrier. Let's look at the core problem traditional science communicators are up against.
To really get why this new research is such a big deal, we have to recognize the brick wall communicators have been slamming their heads against for decades. To the general public, highly abstract science is mostly seen as distant, heavily technical, and, let's be honest, completely inaccessible. When the concepts being taught don't match anything we can physically see or touch in our everyday reality, we naturally build up these massive psychological barriers. Traditional explanation-centered methods, an hour-long lecture full of charts and terrifying equations, they often just backfire. People immediately feel like they aren't equipped to get it, the intimidation factor takes over, and boom, communication totally breaks down.
Now for Section 2, Art as an Entry Point. Let's talk about the surprising intervention proposed during the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology.
A group of brilliant science communicators decided to try something completely out of left field to bridge this massive gap. The paper we're analyzing dives into two specific case studies that acted as these alternative entry points into the incredibly complex world of quantum physics. First, we have an initiative called Quantum Fest in Japan, and then another called Quantum 100 over in Germany. Guys, these were not your typical sleepy university lectures and stuffy auditoriums. Instead, they completely transformed public cultural spaces, like concert halls and interactive venues, into these vibrant, pulsing laboratories of sound and light. They tackled the communication barrier from a totally fresh angle, basically swapping out whiteboards for grand pianos and visual art installations.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer number. 4,000! Over 4,000 people actually showed up and participated across these two events combined. Think about that for a second. For a subject as abstract and notoriously difficult as quantum physics, getting thousands of everyday people to voluntarily show up and actively participate is a massive achievement. It totally proves that the public's appetite for science is absolutely there. It just depends entirely on how you serve it to them. So how exactly did they pull this off and captivate such a huge crowd?
Well, they basically threw out the traditional rulebook. Both Quantum Fest and Quantum 100 used deeply immersive artistic experiences. We're talking about quantum music, where composers literally used algorithms based on quantum mechanics to generate the melodies, and stunning visual art that actually reacted to the physical space. And crucially, they used what the researchers called embodied participation. This meant bypassing traditional seated lectures altogether. Instead of asking the audience to just sit there passively and listen to dry facts, they invited them to move around freely, letting their own physical presence interact with the light and sound. They were essentially stepping right inside the science and experiencing it firsthand.
Which leads us to Section 3, Three Dimensions of Resonance. Let's dive into the academic findings they drew directly from post-event surveys, participant comments, and stakeholder interviews.
The researchers didn't just guess that this worked. They gathered the hard data. They discovered that this immersive approach created a profound resonance with the audience, and they broke this down into three distinct dimensions. Here's the first one: sensory immersion and reduced psychological barriers. Think about it. When you surround someone with beautiful music or captivating, swirling visuals inspired by quantum mechanics, a fundamental shift happens in the brain. The sensory immersion actively lowers those walls of intimidation that usually block learning. The awe and the wonder totally override the fear of math. Suddenly, the audience stops worrying about whether they're smart enough to understand the equations, and they just let themselves be curious, engaged, and completely captivated by what they're seeing and hearing.
And this brilliantly illustrates the second dimension: collective embodied meaning-making. I know, it sounds like a bit of an academic mouthful, but it's an incredibly powerful concept. It basically means that participants were experiencing and interpreting the science physically, and crucially, they were doing it together. Rather than struggling to learn abstract concepts all by themselves, they were moving around the venue, pointing out visual shifts to each other, and making sense of quantum ideas as a community within a shared physical space. Conversations were sparking between complete strangers. The learning process totally transformed from a solitary, frustrating task into a dynamic, shared, social event where everybody was figuring it out together.
The final dimension is emerging transformative engagement. You see, this artistic immersion didn't just end when the music stopped and everyone went home. The researchers found that it led to a new, lasting, and genuinely transformative interaction with the material. Because these people had connected with the topic on a sensory and communal level, their whole relationship with the idea of quantum physics changed. They didn't just memorize a random fact, their perspective shifted from feeling locked out of science to feeling welcomed right into it. They walked away feeling a personal connection to the quantum universe, actually eager to keep exploring it on their own terms.
Moving right along to Section 4, Beyond Conceptual Understanding. Here is the major paradigm shift proposed by the authors based on these awesome findings.
So the crucial point is this direct contrast between the old way of communicating and the new. The old guard relies heavily on explanation-centered communication, teaching cold facts, memorizing formulas, and grasping pure logic. But the authors contrast this directly with resonance-driven communication, which is all about forming meaningful, emotional, and sensory relationships with the topic. Now, they aren't saying we should throw out facts and logic entirely, not at all. Instead, they're arguing that resonance-driven communication is this vital complementary method. For incredibly complex topics, building that emotional and sensory resonance kind of has to happen first. It creates a welcoming foundation before the cold, hard facts can even find a place to land in someone's mind.
I really want you to hear this powerful quote directly from the paper. Enabling audiences to form meaningful relationships with science before, alongside, or beyond conceptual understanding. Just let that sink in for a second. What this tells us is that a deep, lasting relationship with science does not always require immediate conceptual mastery. You can appreciate, interact with, and connect to the profound beauty of the universe without having to solve the underlying mathematical equations first. It's a completely liberating way to look at how we learn, right? It gives people the permission to just be in awe of science.
And that leaves us with a final, thought-provoking question to carry with us. What if the first step to understanding science is just feeling it? The next time you encounter a topic that seems impossibly complex or hopelessly abstract, maybe don't start with the dense textbook. Start with the art, the music, or the physical experience that brings those concepts to life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep exploring, keep seeking out those new perspectives, and I'll see you next time.